Hello. So my name's Carlos Daniels, and I'm here representing Local Loop Farm, and I'm the founder of it. And I just like to say that I'm an urbanite, and increasingly, the world is becoming urbanites. According to this UN graph, the trend suggests that most of the global population will be urbanites by 2030. Now, with this large concentration of people coming, people come to the realization that we need to get food to these urban centers. And this will take good city planning, redevelopment, and infrastructure, and the desire and a will to see this happen. And logistics will be the name of the game. The interesting thing about this is, according to work done by Rick Perot and his team at Iowa State, the average distance traveled from food from farm to plate is 1,500 miles. And as the world continues to have this conversation about carbon output and its effect on things like climate change and pollution, we see our food has a big carbon footprint. This doesn't include the carbon output of the production of the food and the animals involved and the pollution generated. And that's a conversation, for a different day for sure. Food accessibility is a conversation we are needing to be having. Now, I'm from Detroit, and the entire city gets the notorious label of being a food desert. Now, that's a debatable subject, but one thing holds true. There are areas within the city with dense populations who have trouble with access to clean, green food. This is important because growing up, I remember when we would go to corner stores rather than grocery stores to get most of our food. And now we have an entire generation of youth who don't really know their food all that well, or their food groups. And that's reflected in, high rates of diabetes and other chronic illnesses related to food consumption. Now, this, in my opinion, is a problem because there's this loss of intimacy with food, knowing where and how your food was grown. 50 years ago, most of the population lived in rural areas, meaning they had this visual and visceral experience with the production of their food. The other important elements to this conversation is the sustainability of food production. How do we create systems that support themselves? One thing's for sure, if we're going to support and feed people at the same time reducing our carbon footprint, we have to rethink the way we get our food to its plate. One of the things Local Loop has been working on is creating food systems that support and sustain itself. We want to redefine waste, and that's really important because half of the world's food is wasted. Half of the world's food is wasted. Now, that's a problem because many mouths could have been fed that food, but also most of that food goes to landfills where it contributes further to pollution. Those valuable nutrients could be recycled back into the system. And you may ask, how do we recycle that food back into the system? Some people throw out there, we need to start backyard composting again. And I'm a proponent for backyard composting, but we need a lot of those nutrients and we need them now. So when you look at systems, there's no systems more sustainable than nature. Nature takes nutrients and recycles it back through a series of organisms. Those nutrients get recycled and forms that ecosystem, making it sustainable. Now we want to take that model and put it in our own human ecosystem. So we're using specific organisms that have desirable and compatible characteristics to recycle those nutrients. The basic template we're working with is a system called aquaponics. Now that's a combination of aquaculture, which is fish farming, and hydroponics, which is growing plants in a soil in a nutrient-based solution. And when you put the two together, it creates a sustainable form of agriculture because those nutrients are being recycled through this system. Now, what's really good about that is it only uses about 10% of the amount of water required as compared to traditional forms of agriculture. And that's important right now because when you look at places like California, you know, they're in severe drought. And so they need more sustainable forms of agriculture where they're trying to manage their water resources. You can grow vertical, and that makes it space conscious. And when we're talking about, you know, putting food in urban areas, we need vertical systems in order to make sustainable and be able to reach the capacity necessary. You also using a natural fertilizer in the form of the fish waste, and there's no pesticides involved or herbicides. And you know, that's for the conscious eaters, obviously. And you can get protein in the form of a fish and as well as produce in the system. Now there is an exception. That's most aquaponics systems rely on fish weight or rely on fish feed, which comes mostly from fish meal, which is mostly produced unsustainably from fish stocks from the world's oceans, and these prices are increasing every year, with the world fish stocks becoming increasingly strained. Now again, if we mimic nature, we can recycle those nutrients that are lost back through the system. When you look at some organisms like, for example, black soldier flies, these are vicarious composters, and they break down food quickly into quality fertilizer. And in their larval stage, they're great feed for fish. So they significantly reduce the food waste and they act as a feed. Another example is the spirulina. It's a blue-green algae that's nutrient dense and provides most of the amino acids required for fish. This organism can be grown in conjunction with the plants in the system, and they can be grown with the fish waste and fed back to the fish. Now you take that system, that overall system, at least in our model, and it increases the output while reducing its environmental impact, making it an attractive candidate for urban centers. This is the schematic of our design and the breakdown of the relationship between the organisms and their functions. Now, I know it looks quite complex, but in essence, these nutrients are starting from food waste, and that's our primary input. And that's being cycled through a series of organisms. And the ones I just spoke of, the spirulina and the black soldier flies, and they're being fed up to the fish, which is then supplying the nutrients for the plants to grow. And that cycle continues to perpetuate itself. Now, we want to initially work with local restaurants and take their food waste, in return selling fish and produce back to them. This makes it economical and sustainable. But in the long term, we imagine communities who set their food scraps out on the corner right next to their garbage to be picked up and transported to a local loop farm. And those nutrients recycled back into the community to be sold at their local grocers or direct to consumer as well. We want to make educational spaces for youth to see how their food was grown and purchased, increasing the intimacy of food in the urban environments and making for conscious consumers. Now, when you include renewables in this concept, it only, things like solar, biodigesters, and hot water composters, it becomes increasingly more sustainable and cost effective. Now, we're a young company. We're essentially a startup. We've been in the incubator for the last year. We recently were privileged to win a competition actually in this great city of Grand Rapids called the Wege Prize. And our team is in the process right now working with developers to see this project come through. And we plan on initially putting a greenhouse on a roof and seeing this seeing this concept fully develop. And so, you know, working with us and working with local loop farms, we can imagine a world where food is grown in urban centers and in a much more sustainable manner. So, you know, come help local loop farms go from farm to plate to farm. Thank you.